and she can do all of that without bathing. Is that what you thought she was going to say too? That was the first time anybody's ever said that. Okay, now first things first, for Facebook. Everybody wave. And if it doesn't happen on Facebook, it doesn't happen, you know that. Okay, excellent, excellent, all of you, fine, good. All right, don't let me forget my phone. Thank you so much for inviting me here tonight, Noreen and Dave and Reba. This is great. You notice I tried. Do you see these flowers that Reba and Dave brought? Is this not spectacular? The best flowers I've ever seen. I live in West Newton, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. We have a wonderful garden. That is one of the joys of my life. Every night when my husband and I come home, we walk through the garden and see what flowers have come and what's going. And you know, now the peonies are just coming out and the tulips are over, and our hydrangea died. So, but that's one of the fun, wonderful things about having a garden. You see the cycles of life, just sort of like you do in murder mysteries. So it's wonderful to see these gorgeous flowers. Thank you, Rita and Dave. They're fabulous. Books have always been such an important part of my life. I grew up in really rural Indiana, so rural that you couldn't see another house from our house. And my sister and I used to ride our ponies to the library and get books and then fill up the saddlebags with books and bring them home and read up in the hayloft. So I know I look like kind of a city girl now. I turned out to be a sort of city girl, but those were my origins back in Indianapolis, Indiana. So you can imagine the absolute joy that I felt when I saw my own books in the libraries and in bookstores. Those books that I had taken out, my sister and I had taken out as a little kid, there were my own books in the store as well. What I didn't realize when I saw them was that the cover was going to say, Hank Phillippi Ryan, The Wrong Girl. Somebody should have thought of that. And the first one is Hank Phillippi Ryan, The Other Woman. You know, also kind of a treasure. It reminds me of, I've been a television reporter for almost 40 years. And it reminds me, the juxtaposition of the name and the title reminds me of a story that we did a couple of years ago about headlights. Not headlights, headlights on cars. And you know how you drive, this is New York, do you drive? Yeah. You know how when you drive at night, from time to time it's difficult to see and you think, oh my goodness, I must be getting old, I can't see anymore, the headlights aren't working as well as they used to. And we did a big investigation about that and found out that it's not you, happily, it is the headlights themselves, that as time goes by, the bulbs in the headlights get dimmer and the plastic over them gets more opaque, and as a result, you can't see as well. So we did a big story about that. I have reported the story, and we shot the story, and wrote the story, and went down to the edit booth and made the little movie that we make every day for the news. And the last thing that a reporter does before a news story gets on the air is you shoot what's called the stand-up close, C-L-O-S-E, and you've seen that many times. Come on in, that's no problem, I'll start over. The last thing before a story gets on the air is what's called a stand-up close. And if you watch local news or any kind of news, you've seen those many times. The reporter stands in front of a big graphic that explains what the story is about as like big fire, as if the pictures of the flames wouldn't tell you enough. But anyway, you stand in front of a big graphic that says whatever the story is about, and the reporter holds the microphone and says, you know, as a result of our story, 27 people were sent to prison and 3 new laws were passed, or whatever it is. So it's time for me to shoot the stand-up close for the story about the headlights. And I put on my little reporter suit and comb my hair and put on a bunch of makeup and come down into the newsroom to shoot the stand-up close. And I turn around, and the graphic behind me says, dangerously dim. So I went to the news director and I said, do you see the graphic? I can't stand in front of a graphic that says dangerously dim. And he laughed just like you did. Just move that stuff, it's fine. One says reserved for Hank Phillippi Ryan, but she's not going to be here. I went to the news director and I said, I can't stand in front of a sign of a graphic that says dangerously dim. And he burst out laughing just as you did. And then he goes, yeah, we don't really have time to fix that. So we're just going to have to stand there. And so
The only thing that was worse than that, I'll tell you this, the only thing that was worse than that, we had a really gorgeous anchor woman at Channel 7. And one day she had to stand in front of a graphic that said, botched plastic surgery. So that was kind of great. That was kind of good. Anyway, I've been a reporter for almost 40 years. I've wired myself with hidden cameras. I've confronted corrupt politicians. I've gone undercover and in disguise and chased down criminals. We've sent people to prison. We've changed laws in Massachusetts and gotten literally millions of dollars in refunds and restitution as a result of our investigative stories. I'm still going strong. I'm still on the air at Channel 7 in Boston, the NBC affiliate. So I'm doing this sort of juggling of both lives. I'm still a full-time reporter at the station. But really, from the first time I read, though, up in the hayloft, Nancy Drew and Sherlock Holmes. You read Nancy Drew and Sherlock Holmes, right? You read Nancy Drew, The Clue in the Clock, and The Clue in the Diary, which I thought was Clue in the Dairy for like the whole book. And I'm thinking, shouldn't there be cows? So I finally figured that out. And then I went on to all the wonderful British women authors, Ngaio Marsh and Josephine Tay, Marjorie Allingham, Dorothy Sayers, and Agatha Christie. And I really fell in love with the architecture of the mystery. The idea that a good author could fool you, could write a story that would have you guessing until the very end. And then in the end, you would say, oh, I could have figured that out. I could have followed the clues. If I had just been clever, I would have known. The idea that writing a book like that someone would not be able to put down, that was just glorious to me. But as you know, my career took another turn, and I went into journalism. And you'd think that being an investigative reporter and writing crime fiction would be very different. But one of the things that is absolutely glorious, and one of the things that I've discovered, is that doing investigative reporting and writing crime fiction is really very similar. Because whether you're making stuff up in crime fiction or just telling the absolute truth in investigative reporting, what matters is telling a good story. That's the most important element of it, is just telling a great story with characters you care about and an important problem that needs to be solved. You want the good guys to win, right? And the bad guys to get what's coming to them. You're tracking down clues, you're following leads, you're doing research, and in the end, you want some justice, right? And you want to change the world a little bit. So whether I'm writing crime fiction or whether I'm doing investigative reporting, it's the same thing. I want to make a difference in your life. I want to change the way you look at the world. I want to change the whole world a little bit and show you what justice can be. You know, the difference, of course, is in television you can't make stuff up. You can't. I saw somebody smiling in the back of the room. You can't. And here's the other thing that's so fascinatingly the same. All of those Emmys on my shelves, every one of those 30 shiny Emmys, represents a secret that someone didn't want me to tell you, right? That's what that's all about. Every one of those awards represents a moment in time where someone told me something that someone else was trying to hide. And I got to investigate it and then tell you about it and maybe change the world a little bit. And that is exactly the same in good crime fiction. It's all about secrets. Who has a secret? Who knows the secret? Who's going to tell the secret? What will happen when that secret gets told? And it's fascinating. And that is also, the secret is the key to The Wrong Girl, my book, The Wrong Girl. And people always say, where did you get your idea for the books? And some authors say they hate to answer that question. And I love to answer that question because it shows you that you never know in your life what wonderful thing is around the next corner. My husband and I actually don't celebrate the anniversary of the day we met. We celebrate the anniversary of the day before we met. And we call that You Never Know Day. Because you never know what wonderful thing is around the next corner, correct? And that is exactly the same as what happens when you come up with the idea for a good story. You know, as an investigative reporter, I get hundreds of phone calls and emails and letters a week of people wanting me to investigate a story for them. And not all of them turn out to be a great story for television, but sometimes I recognize that someone is telling me something that would be absolutely perfect for crime fiction. And a couple of you, you know, with a story that with some tweaks and some polishing and some imagination and some thought and some excitement injected could be a perfect crime fiction story. And that is exactly what happened with The Wrong Girl. A woman called me at Channel 7 and she said, Hank, I want you to investigate a story about adoption. So I said, okay, what about it? And she said, you should do a story about my cousin. She said, my cousin had been given up for adoption by her mother as an infant. And 26 years later, she got a call from an adoption agency saying, we found your birth mother. Would you like to be reunited with your birth mother? And this woman talked about it for a while and thought about it and decided, yes, she would like to meet her birth mother. So she called the adoption agency and said, yes, I'd like to meet her. So the story goes, this woman tells me on the phone. She says, my cousin went up to New Hampshire, to neutral territory, and met this woman. They had a cup of tea, and it was very nice, and they liked each other very much. But she said, it became clear soon after that they were not mother and daughter, that this was a mistake. And this woman says to me on the phone, can you believe it, Hank? They sent that woman the wrong girl. And I thought, I can make a book out of that. And it was just great. Now, you know, I work at Channel 7, so my first responsibility was to my television station and to find out whether that was a good story. Maybe that was a big investigation. I mean, if an adoption agency is reuniting birth parents with the wrong children, that is a scandal. Can you imagine how many lives would be ruined and how many lives would be changed and how many people would be upset and how tragic that would be? If it's misfeasance or incompetence or neglect or negligence, you know, that is a good story. I have to confess to you that there was a moment in this conversation with her where I was thinking, wonder what I'll wear to the Emmys. But of course, anyway, so going on. So I'm asking her all these questions. How do you know? Do you have paperwork? What happened? Tell me the story of what really happened. And the thing that's so fascinating about it is that what happened in real life, what really happened to this woman and her cousin, is so ridiculously coincidental that if I put it in a book, you would not believe it. You would throw the book against the wall and say, that is so ridiculous, that could never happen. Here's what it was. 26 years ago, two cousins, this is the story that the woman tells me. 26 years ago, two cousins who didn't know each other very well, unbeknownst to each other, gave birth to infant daughters on the same day. And unbeknownst to each other, they gave up these infant daughters for adoption to the same adoption agency. They didn't know. And I'm making this up, but let's say their names were Mary Williams and Marie Williams. So Mary Williams and Marie Williams each give up their infant daughters on the same day to the same adoption agency. Time goes by. 26 years later, Marie Williams is looking for her daughter. And the daughter of Mary Williams is looking for her mother. And the adoption agency figures they must be a match. That must be a match. How could Marie Williams, the mother, and the daughter of Mary Williams, it's got to be a clerical error, it's got to be a mistake. And they matched them up. They matched them up. And it was just wrong. You know, it was back in the day of multi-part carbon paper forms. Some of you remember that and how the words were all fuzzy and, you know, mistakes were made. And that's what happened in this particular case. Now, as I said, if I wrote a book about that, you wouldn't believe it, right? You would say, two cousins who didn't know each other gave birth on the same day. I don't think so. I don't think so. It's just too outrageous. But to me, that was the genesis of a wonderful possibility for a crime fiction novel. What if an adoption agency was reuniting birth parents with the wrong children? Why would they do that? What would be the motivation for that? What would be the reason for that? What would be the goal of that? What would happen as a result of that? it could have been a truly interesting feature story for Channel 7, but it wasn't an investigation. But as a thriller author, I could see the germ of a story growing right there. What if you didn't know the truth about your own family? What if someone had told you that everything you believed about your family history was just not true? What would you do? And what would happen? And what would happen as a result of that? And that turned out to be The Wrong Girl, which, as Noreen said, just won the Agatha for Best Mystery of the Year, is nominated for the Anthony and the Daphne, has been on the Boston Globe bestseller list. I'm thinking about Joe Finder, whose Suspicion just made the New York Times bestseller list at number 12. We love Joe. We love Suspicion. I highly recommend that book if you haven't read it yet. Anyway, 5 weeks on the Boston Globe bestseller list. I'm very happy about The Wrong Girl. So let me read you a little bit from The Wrong Girl now. The Wrong Girl introduces Jane Ryland. Jane Ryland is a television reporter in Boston who's been fired from her job for protecting a source. And she has taken a low-paying job on a local newspaper, trying to redeem herself, trying to get her journalism mojo back a little bit, trying to make people believe that she is a good reporter. And a friend comes to her and says, I think I've been reunited with the wrong birth mother. You need to help me and you need to find out what's going on. It also introduces the dashing Boston police detective Jake Brogan. And Jake Brogan has something of his own to prove. Jake, who I always picture as looking like Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird, which dates me, but okay, that's what he looks like. I mean, Betty Lee, it's cool, right? So anyway, Jake Brogan, who has something of his own to prove because he has been made a police detective in Boston at too young an age. And everyone knows that it's because his grandfather was the police commissioner. So Jake has to prove that he has the right stuff to be a cop. And he is on the trail of the murder of a young foster mother, a woman who was found killed in her kitchen, 2 toddlers asleep in the back room, kids who were too young to talk. Another mystery that he finds is as he's investigating the murdered woman's apartment, he goes to the back room and there's an empty crib. So where is the baby that should be in that crib? Is it a child who's coming in to the house? And if so, where is the baby? Is it a baby who was there? And if so, was this baby kidnapped? Who is the child in this crib? So Jane on the trail of an adoption agency that may be reuniting birth parents with the wrong children. Jake on the trail of a murdered foster mother and a missing child. And as always in my stories, those 2 storylines come together and each of them helps each other solve the crime. Now I know you're saying, come on, an adoption agency and a missing baby. I know how this comes out. Well, you don't. I promise you. I have no idea what's going to happen at the end of my books as I'm writing them. And when I figured out the end of The Wrong Girl, I was alone in my study. And this was difficult because I didn't know how this book was going to end. I just didn't know. And I had gone to my husband and said, I don't think I can solve this crime. Because when you're writing the way I do, not knowing what's going to happen next, what actually happens is that I, as the author, am solving the crime along with the people in the book. So I'm doing the research, I'm doing the interviews, I'm following the clues and seeing where that leads, along with my main characters. And in The Wrong Girl, I thought I couldn't do it. I thought it was an unsolvable crime. And I can tell you, there was the moment that I figured out what happened. I was by myself in the study, and I stood up and applauded. And I thought, oh, sit down. You know, you're by yourself. You're by yourself. So let me read you a little bit from The Wrong Girl. And I'll tell you 2 things about this. One is, this is the part of the story where Jake Brogan, the detective, first comes upon the murder victim. He and his partner, Detective Paul DeLuca, have been called to the scene of this apartment by Detective Hennessy, who's been called to the scene by a 911 call. As I said, there are 2 toddlers in the back room. They've been taken into protective custody by another police officer now. And the reason I chose this part of the book is because the reason is that it's full of clues. It is full of clues. When you read the book, and I hope you do, when you read the book and then go back to these 3 pages, you will say, oh, there it was, there it was, there it was. I didn't know I was putting those clues in when I wrote this section, and later they turned out to be the key to the whole thing. You won't know what they are when you hear this, but when you read the book, you'll think, oh, I can't believe it. Sorry, so here it is, chapter 4. The crime scene cleanup people would have quite a job on their hands. Not as bad as some Jake had seen, but murder was never good. They'd arrive soon enough, whoever the landlord hired, and see it for themselves. Jake closed his eyes briefly, making a promise to the woman on the linoleum floor. We'll find this asshole, he muttered. Hennessy was right. Poor kids, poor woman. There'd been nothing on the stairway. He'd kept his gloved hands off the banisters and walls, hugging the wall to avoid possible suspect footprints, was careful walking up the 3 flights to the top floor. The wooden front door of apartment C stood open, leading to a threadbare living room, cheap couch with haphazard pillows, then a dining room with an oval table, white tablecloth, 3 twisty metal candlesticks in the center, no candles. Clean. No family photos, no keepsakes, no sign of forced entry, exactly as Hennessy had reported. Yo, Dee, what you got? He called toward what must be the kitchen, but DeLuca had gone out a back door, left it open. A spotlight glared from one outside corner of the minuscule back balcony, and Jake saw his partner's lanky silhouette leaning over the wooden railing. 3 floors up. No escape that way, probably, unless the bad guy could fly. It was 4 steps across the living room to an archway into the kitchen. Jake paused, getting a read on the place, sniffed, as he always did. No gas, nothing burning, a sweet fragrance of maybe some cleaning thing. He surveyed to left to right, cataloging the elements, typing notes without looking at his BlackBerry keyboard. Dented white refrigerators seen better days, but clean. No grubby smudges around the handle. He'd have to check inside. 2 saucepans on a gas stove, open box of Quaker Oats on the drain board, an open box of Cheerios on its side, a few pieces spilled on the floor. Cereal. Jake looked at his watch. 5 in the afternoon. Huh. No dishes in the sink, a stack of multicolored sponges in a plastic dish, some generic green soap on the side. A high chair, aluminum and plastic, not new. The molded pink serving tray, wiped clean. A little pink bowl with a rabbit decal. And that body on the floor. One side of her face against the once ivory linoleum, the other revealing an angry red welt, more than a welt. The skin had already turned purple. Her eyes were open. A trickle of blood made a jagged seam across the yellowed floor, the dark seeping into the cracks between the tiles. Blunt trauma, Jake typed. Weapon? White female, approx 30, eyes brown, hair blonde, he typed. It spilled across her back, clean, shiny, cared for. Hooded sweatshirt, Levi's, bare feet. If you ignored what seemed to be the cause of death, it looked like the woman simply decided she needed a nap, or been dropped from the ceiling. Had she tripped, hit her head on the stove or floor? Jake stood, assessing. A siren wailed in the distance, the sound keening through the open back door. All the street lights popped on, and the interior lights in neighboring triple-deckers. People would be gathering below, the neighborhood disaster irresistible. Yellow crime scene tape should be up. Where the hell was the new medical examiner? Maybe she was the siren. It wasn't suicide, anyway. If the woman had been clonked with a frying pan, like Hennessy said, it wasn't in sight. No sign at all of a murder weapon. The woman looked poor, but the place was, same as her hair, cared for. So sad to see her kitchen messed up this way. Blood and Cheerios. Jake never got used to that first moment, the first glimpse of the victim. Murder was the consequence of greed or fear or drugs or anger or frustration or money or whatever made someone explode and decide their needs were more important than whoever was in their way. Jake and DeLuca had seen their share.
solved their share too. Plenty of bad guys owed their current long-term residency at MCI Cedar Junction to the work of Brogan and DeLuca. Her ID was somewhere in this shabby little apartment. They'd find it, then they'd find out who she was, then they'd figure out who had a problem with her. This was a domestic, Jake predicted. They'd close it fast. Hey, Harvard. DeLuca stood at the back door, his sport coat open, black hoodie underneath, no hat. His hatchet nose red from the cold, he swiped the back of his gloved hand across it. You ready to join us on this planet? Hey, Dee, Jake said. Jane always said Dee looked like he'd gotten thinner every time they saw each other. DeLuca lived on black coffee and roast beef subs. Maybe that was it. Right now, though, Jake had a bigger question. Besides the murder weapon, another important thing was missing from this crime scene. We've got a dead woman, Jake. We've got a dead woman. Jake zipped up his jacket, zipped it down, then up again, like he always did when he was thinking. No apparent murder weapon. An empty apartment. 2 little kids who can't talk. So who the hell called 911? So quickly, this, like any good thriller, I hope this book is about something. Not just about who done it or even why done it, but it takes you into the world of adoption and foster care. Anyone who has navigated those difficult waters of new children, infants, foster care, adoption, will understand how by the flutter of a butterfly wing, you're a Kennedy or a foster child. How does that happen? Why does that happen? And where does that leave us? And what is that book? And what is that about? The book is also about greed and manipulation. It's about deception and fraud and the power of desire. And what happens when someone preys on our primal need to have a family, and that is the wrong girl. How many of you are writing books? How many of you want to, hope to, wish to? Yes. I am the poster child for following your dreams in mid-career. I didn't start writing till I was 55, 10 years ago. And if you take nothing from tonight, except my book, if you take nothing from tonight, I want you to know that I am the proof that you can do this. If you want to write your memoir or poetry or your mystery or whatever it is, I don't want you to wake up one morning and say, even if it's not writing, if it's opening a business or trying something new or learning Italian, I don't want you to wake up 10 years from now and say, I regret that I didn't do that. I am the proof that you can do whatever it is. Do you know the folk singer Judy Collins? You know Judy Collins, the folk singer. My husband and I went to hear Judy Collins at Sanders Theater at Harvard a couple of months ago. I'm glad you're nodding your head. I told my producer, who's 30, I said to her, Mary, Jonathan and I are going to go hear Judy Collins. And she says, oh, like, no idea. So I said, you know Judy Collins, she's this fabulous folk singer. She sang both sides now. I couldn't have gotten through college without listening to her records. And Mary says, records? She didn't, but it would have been funny, right? It would have been funny. She didn't say that. Anyway, Jonathan and I went to hear Judy Collins, and she told the story about when she was a child growing up in Denver, that she was supposed to be a concert pianist, that her parents had told her that she was destined to be a concert pianist. And she worked and studied and practiced, and that was her entire life. But she said that she knew, from the moment she knew anything, that she wanted to be a folk singer. And finally she said, at age 19, she said, I packed my bags and I moved to New York to be a folk singer. She said, I packed my bags and I moved to New York and I took all my songs with me. And then she said, of course, I hadn't written any of them yet. I hadn't written any of them yet. And you know, it just touched me because I think we all have songs. We all have songs. We just may not have written them yet. So go, write your songs, and I cannot wait to hear them. Thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. I'll be happy to answer any difficult questions that you have. Anyone about any? Yes.
Actually, Henrietta.
I should have quit while I was ahead here, right? It's really Harriet Ann. Harriet Ann. My dad was the music critic for the Chicago Daily News back in the 50s. And apparently I was almost named Harmony. If you can imagine. But they named me Harriet after my Uncle Harry, who introduced my dad to the music of Mozart when he was a kid. So that was his gift, not so much mine. Before my mom died, I said to her, well, you know, when you're 8 and all the cute girls are Debbie and Linda, you know, you don't want to be Harriet. It's just not good. But finally, as I grew up, I realized that Harriet was a cool, competent name. So on my mother's deathbed, I said to her, I need to tell you, Mom, I kind of get Harriet now. Thank you, you know, it's a good name. And Mom says, for 62 years, you bugged me about that name. You know, you were such a difficult child. So yes, it's Harriet Ann. Who else? Yes.
Do you read your own audiobooks?
Do I read my own audiobooks? I don't. It's the audiobook experience. I mean, I'd love to, actually. And I think it would be really fun to do. It's difficult to read a whole book I have 5 points of view in my book, so I'd have to have 5 different voices. And so the wonderful actress Ileana Kadushin reads my Macmillan audiobooks, and she's terrific, but she's very dramatic. Jane Ryland opened the window of her car. And when I first heard it, I thought, that's not how my books sound. And then I realized, and it's kind of interesting, I realized that my books to me sound like me reading them in my head. You know, I've read each one day after day after day for 2 years. So that's what it sounds like. But I know some authors who have read their own audiobooks. It seems like it would be fun. Yes?
In drawing your idea from real life, from a woman that called you, was there any concern that she could trace her phone call
I asked
to
her.
you? You did?
I did. I asked her.
What was that like?
I called her and I said, I don't think I'm going to do a story about this for Channel 7. Everything turned out fine. You know, it turned out fine. They figured out what the problem was. They switched, and it was pretty interesting. I said, but there's a germ of a story. Would you mind if I sort of took that and ran with it? And she was thrilled. When you read the book, it is nothing like that. It's just so nothing like that, that if I hadn't told you that that's what happened, you would never get that. You would never get that from the book. But that's a really good question, because I was a little, you know, I wondered about that. But she, you know what, she would never have even recognized her story in the book. You know, a lot of good crime fiction starts with the little nugget from something that's real. My book, The Other Woman, that won the Mary Higgins Clark Award, some people call that The Good Wife Meets Law and Order. That shows you sort of what you're getting. That came from my just thinking about the Mark Sanford case. And at the end of a story I read about Mark Sanford, there was a line that said, you can choose your sin. But you remember who that is, right? Mark Sanford, the ex-governor of South Carolina who ran off with his mistress, okay. And at the end of this article I was reading about him, someone said, you can choose your sin, but you cannot choose your consequences. And I just thought, there's my book. And it's on the cover of the book now, so it's amazing. My new book, I'm so glad you asked about it. My new book, Truth Be Told, and you see I fixed it, Hank Phillippi Ryan, Truth Be Told, which is much better, right? Much better than The Other Woman. It's about a banker turned Robin Hood who decides to manipulate people's mortgage records to keep them out of foreclosure. So people can she decides people should keep their homes, that banks have a lot of money, but people don't. Thank you. So banks have a lot of money, but people don't, and who's gonna miss a couple $100,000 from time to time? Of course, and this is one of the things I love to explore in crime fiction is, that may have the best of intentions, but the problem is it's robbing the bank, which they frown on. And so when someone does something good that happens to be breaking the law, what the tension in that decision, the tension in that action, and what someone has to decide along the way. That's what this book is about. It's also about a reporter who makes stuff up. So truth be told. Any other questions? Yes.
Yes.
My favorite crime writers, all of them, are very appreciative of their readers, and that's certainly true of you. I think that, you know, every time I've been lucky enough to see you at an event, you're always so wonderful about interacting with your readers and answering our questions. Has there ever been a time in your writing where that's been a drawback, or have you ever wanted to write something and thought, you know, I don't know if my readers will quite cotton that?
You know, that's interesting because I always think, you know, how many of you cook? It's wonderful to cook, right? Because you get to create something out of ingredients, then you get to make something new from it. But that delicious thing that you made isn't really fulfilled until you give it to someone else to eat, right? And they say, oh, I love this. And that's sort of how I think about my writing. I get to create something new that never existed before and make something fabulous out of those ingredients from my imagination. But then I get to give it to someone else to read. And I don't think that the books are really fulfilled until the reader becomes the other side of the equation. You know, that's what makes the books fulfill their destiny, is that you read them. That's really all that matters. Do I think about what my readers, and I love thinking, I love saying my readers, that's so nice. I hope I never get over that, that's lovely. What my readers will think, I think I want my readers to know what a Hank book is. That they're going to be fast-paced and page-turners, they're going to be about people that you care about, they're not going to be graphically violent, they're not going to be there's not going to be graphic sex, there's not going to be people with eyes stabbed out, and they're going to be smart, clever, suspense-filled thrillers about real people. So I would not write something that wasn't that. And that in mind, they say to write the kind of book that you love to read. And that is exactly what I do. And I was saying to someone the other day that I know when I'm finished with the book, writing the book, when I'm on the last edit and I'm reading it, reading the manuscript, and I forget that I wrote it. And that's when I know I'm done. Yes?
Have you ever been really frustrated where you couldn't solve the crime, and is that something, an anecdote perhaps you could?
In writing a book or writing a real, he's asking if I've ever been frustrated at not being able to solve the crime, and I'm wondering if he means in my crime fiction or as an investigative reporter, because every day as an investigative reporter, you know, I've been yelled at and pushed down and threatened and followed and all kinds of things, and that's, you know, it's dangerous to be an investigative reporter. It's also dangerous to be a crime fiction author because every day I realize that I have no idea what I'm doing. Exactly.
The crime fiction, like the description of, you know, getting to the end and solving it.
You know, it's interesting because there's a fabulous quote from Thomas Edison. A fabulous quote from Thomas Edison that I think about all the time. And Edison said, when you think you have exhausted all the possibilities, remember this, you haven't. You know, and that just is so freeing because I think, okay, it's not that there's no solution, it's just that I haven't thought of it yet. And that's, you know, that's so empowering. And besides, I have to. There's no question, I have to find it. As a reporter, I'm so used to deadlines that I know that when the deadline is approaching, I have to be done. I mean, if I said to my news director, could I be on at 10 after 6 instead of 6 because I'm just not feeling it? You know, can you imagine how long would I have a job? So it's the same with writing crime fiction. Some days it's fabulous and my fingers are flying over the keyboard so fast that a couple of times, Word has said to me, the word processing software has said, there are so many errors and spelling mistakes in your document that Word can no longer correct them. Have you had this? Because I'm just typing it so fast. And there are other days that I'm sitting at my computer going, no, not the. You know, and on that kind of level. So it's a joy every day. Even on the bad days, it's great. I get to write books. How wonderful is that? Yes, final question?
Of all the books that you've written, which one's your favorite one and why?
Oh my goodness, of all the books that I've written, which one is my favorite one? How could I possibly answer that? When I'm in the midst of each book, I really love it some of the time. When I'm finished, when I see it, when this arrived at my doorstep 3 days ago, I almost burst into tears. you know, this is my new book, I love this. But I adore The Other Woman. I think it's smart and clever and unique and original. You know, The Wrong Girl is compelling and emotional and very, very suspenseful. So I'm happy with them all. I'm happy with them all. No, I don't. Well, you and I will talk afterwards because there's no way to have a favorite. Maybe my favorite one is the next one, which I'm writing right now, called What You See. And it's about surveillance and privacy and how everything we do is photographed and recorded. And we'll see what happens. I'm at 50,000 words now in it, and I have no idea what happens, so this time next year I'll let you know. You are all treasures and joys. I really appreciate you all coming. Two more things. Find me on Facebook, Hank Phillippi Ryan author page, and on Twitter, Hank_Phillippi. I'm on it all the time, sadly, and answer everyone. And my agent requires me to say this. A signed book makes a great gift. So I'll be happy to sign books for you or anyone else. Thank you so much.